Is this the best headphone ever created? It's the new SR-009 electrostatic ear speakers, the new flagship from Stax in Japan, and it's what we'll be talking about in this episode of headfi TV. Now, before we get going, I wanted to take a moment to thank Jack Woo of Woo Audio. This is his personal SR-009. He picked it up back in March, I think, in Japan. He personally went to Japan to pick it up, and he let us borrow it for about the last month. But not just the SR-009, he also let us borrow this, the Woo Audio WES, which is the Woo Audio flagship electrostatic headphone amplifier. So once again, we've had a beautiful rig to play with for a month for this very episode, and thanks to Jack Woo and Woo Audio for it. Now, it's likely many of you aren't familiar with electrostatic headphones, as they're really not very common, and they're quite different than the headphones most of us use. Most of the headphones we use a dynamic type driver, and most commonly a moving coil driver, fixed magnet voice coil attached to a cone type speaker driver. And I think most of you know what I'm talking about, because loudspeakers also use that kind of driver very commonly. But an electrostatic driver, again, quite different. What you'll find in general in an electrostatic driver is a very thin membrane with an electrical charge drawn drum tight between two metal plates. Now, voltage is applied to the two metal plates, and the membrane, the electrically charged membrane in between, then vibrates and makes the sound in response to that. Now, this is a very basic, very elementary explanation, but we'll provide links where you can find more information on electrostatic headphones if you're interested in how they work. The key takeaway, though, that I'm trying to get to is that low mass diaphragm. And I want to talk about just how light they can be. I want to go back to when I was a teenager, which was eons ago, when I worked at an audio store, a hi-fi store. Now, at that hi-fi store, we actually sold, among other things, Stax headphones, and we also sold electrostatic loudspeakers. Now, one of those loudspeakers had an electrostatic diaphragm, a diaphragm that was between, I think it was 2 feet wide by about 4 feet tall. And that diaphragm weighed less than a cubic inch of air. Now, that really drives home the point about low mass and just how low mass we're talking here. Now, imagine now, that's a 2 foot by 4 foot panel. This is a headphone size driver. So it can be quite a bit lighter. We're talking real low mass here. Now, in theory, what that should translate to is better performance. It's so much lighter that you should have better transient response, better frequency response, just a greater sense of detail. There's just so much less mass to move. And in theory, that should be the case. You should get better performance from an electrostatic driver. Now, you may have noticed that I said in theory electrostatic headphones should outperform dynamic ones. It's just that I haven't always found that to be the case in my experience. For example, this is the previous flagship headphone. It's still available, by the way. It's called the SR-007. It's the previous Stax flagship before the SR-009. An electrostatic headphone, a great headphone, and certainly one of the best. I just haven't found it to be necessarily better than the top flight dynamic headphones like the Sennheiser HD800, the Audeze LCD2, or the HiFiMan HE series of planar magnetic headphones. I find that through top flight rigs, these dynamic headphones perform absolutely at the level of an SR-007. And I know some fans of SR-007s will disagree with me, but that's just, in my opinion, my experience. There was an electrostatic headphone released by Sennheiser many years ago called the Orpheus. It was actually a system. It consisted of the HE90 headphone and the HEV90 electrostatic headphone amplifier, and they came as a system. Very limited edition. It was the best headphone Sennheiser's ever released. Again, it was electrostatic. I never owned one because it was prohibitively expensive, and very limited edition. I think they sold about, I think 300 of them before they stopped production. Then they might have sold some additional HE90 headphones. Now, that system, even though I haven't owned it, I've heard it on many occasions, has been pretty much the benchmark for me, the standard by which I've judged all other headphones. It embodied all of the advantages that you'd expect an electrostatic headphone to have, the detail, the sound. It was just a gorgeous sounding headphone, and it still is if you can find them. It's just that now if you want one just for the HE90 headphone part, you'll pay, I think, over $10,000 nowadays. But that headphone absolutely embodied all the advantages of an electrostatic headphone, and I've never heard a dynamic that could keep up with it. Now, I know there are some who've heard it that would disagree with my assessment of the Sennheiser Orpheus system as the best headphone system ever. But then again, I also know that there are some who've heard it that would also agree with me. A phenomenal headphone system. But it really doesn't matter. It's not really worth arguing about, in my opinion, because I think the SR-009 by Stax has raised the bar. This is the first headphone that I've ever heard that I can actually say I think is better than the Sennheiser Orpheus or the HE90. In terms of detail retrieval, it is simply unparalleled. And I don't think anybody's going to argue with me about that. Even if you prefer the way the HE90 sounds, I don't think you're going to argue about the fact, if you hear this, that there's simply more detail available with the SR-009. You know, you don't really realize just how much more information microphones in a recording are capturing than most transducers can convey. But then you put this on and you hear, okay, so it's kind of trite, right? You read audio reviews and you hear, or you read, I'm hearing things I've never heard before. But see, with the SR-009, it's going to happen. It's inevitably going to happen because you will. It's as close to taking a microphone and wiring it directly into your brain. That's how good this is. There's just so much detail there. And it makes me wonder, I mean, is there even any more detail still in a recording to extract? Maybe there is. But when you hear these, you feel like, no, it's not possible. That's how much detail the SR-009 has. So I think I've established that it's hyper detailed, but I guarantee you we'll be talking about that again throughout, between now and the end of the video. It's still going to be mentioned several times because it's such a hallmark of what this headphone is. But you're probably wondering, what does it sound like? What's its tonal balance like? Actually, I find the SR-009 to be quite neutral, with phenomenal extension in both directions. Tremendous bass, tremendous treble extension. Now, on the bass side, does it have the slam, the physical slam that something like an LCD2 has? The answer to that question is no. But it still has very good bass presence and slam, and again, phenomenal extension and unparalleled detail down low. Frankly, it has unparalleled detail throughout the audio band. So the mids, very neutral, inordinately detailed. Treble, again, very neutral and extended, tremendous detail. That's just the best way I can explain it. There's just more there with an SR-009 than with any other headphone. And I frankly just love the way it sounds. I don't mean to suggest that it's sterile, because it's not. It's not cold and sterile, in my opinion, and in my preferences. Now, mind you, I've had the great benefit of running it for the last month through a top-tier amp in the Woo Audio WES. So I can't really comment about how it would sound through a lesser amp. But this system, the Woo WES and the SR-009 to me are just phenomenal. Not cold, not sterile, tremendously detailed, tremendously neutral, but beautiful. So the SR-009 sounds as close to perfect as I've heard, but is it a perfect headphone? There are a couple of downsides potentially that I see with it, one being minor, the other one very major. The minor downside is that I think some may find it bright. It definitely sounds brighter than, say, for example, the SR-007. So if you own an SR-007 and you've lived with it for years, you might actually find the SR-009 bright. That was actually my first impression of it, but after a day of listening to it, I realized there was just so much detail going on that it sounded that way initially, but again, my brain got used to it, and after a day or so, it wasn't bright to me at all. But some might find it bright, period. I don't. Potential downside. Major downside is price. So in the U.S. market, where I am, this is going to be $5,200. That makes it a very, very expensive headphone, because that's just a headphone. And if you didn't already know this, you need very specialized amplifiers to drive an electrostatic headphone. Now, if you're going to buy an SR-009, which again I feel is the best headphone ever made in my experience, I'm not going to recommend anything less than top-flight electrostatic headphone amps. Now, the three that I'd consider, well, the first one I'd consider is the Woo Audio WES. I've lived with it for over a month, and I already know in my experience living with the SR-009 and WES that it is a phenomenal system. So that would be the very first amp I'd consider, and that's $5,000 for the WES, in addition to the $5,200 for this. And the price of the WES goes up if you add any options to it, upgrade your tubes. The price only goes up from there. Then there's the head amp Blue Hawaii Special Edition. That's another amp I'd certainly consider for it. $5,000, and a lot of electrostatic headphone aficionados consider that to be one of the best. Some consider it the best option for electrostatic headphone driving. And that's $5,000 directly from head amp. And then this weekend, this past weekend, we had a meet here at my office, and Ray Samuels brought his A10 Thunderbolt. That one's $6,500, and that drove this very, very well. In fact, we compared the SR-009 to the HE90 on the Thunderbolt. And again, that would be the third amp of the three right now that I'd consider if I decide to buy the SR-009. Now you do the math, and you're looking at $10,000 to $12,000 for an SR-009 system if you want to build a top-flight system, which is the only way I'd recommend doing it. So you can see then where that is a huge disadvantage. Very, very expensive. Oh, now one thing I realized I haven't yet mentioned about the SR-009, which I definitely have to mention, is its build quality. Yeah, it's priced at $5,200, but it feels the part. From these beautifully turned solid aluminum earpieces to the really supple leather and soft padding, just the build quality, the fit and finish it's at least as good, if not better, than any other headphone I've ever handled and put on my head. It's also extremely comfortable. So yeah, the build quality, it feels the part, and it's very comfortable. Now you might be asking the question, am I going to buy one? And to be honest with you, I'm still a little bit on the fence because of that disadvantage we talked about earlier, the price. Yeah, $10,000 to $12,000 is something I have to think about. But there's absolutely no doubt about the fact that I really, really want one. I have been more mobile than stationary lately, and you certainly can't carry this with you. Take a look at that WES and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So again, I'm still on the fence, but I definitely want one. Anyways, that's the Stax SR-009. So to answer that question I asked at the beginning of the episode, is it the best headphone ever created? In my experience, I'd have to say yes. So far, in my experience, this is the best headphone ever created. This is the Stax SR-009. Thanks for watching headfi TV.